President Trump is renewing threats against Iran as the U.S. military moves key assets to the region. Trump is demanding Iran enter talks centered around its nuclear program or face the same speed and violence deployed against the government of Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela. Iran responding defiantly, promising that if pushed, it will respond like never before. Joining me to discuss, Niall Stanage, White House columnist here at The Hill. Hey, Niall, so this seems a little late. A few weeks ago, there were mass protests in the streets in Iran. Trump egged them on, promised to come to their aid if they were attacked. The Iranian regime killed what's estimated to be more than 6,000 people. Trump didn't really act. Now he's sending what's described as an armada, including an aircraft carrier, to the region. What do you make of it?
It's quite a striking development, certainly, Drew, but I think you're right to point out that there are a lot of vaguenesses to this. There's certainly a lot of unanswered questions. You're quite right that we did seem a while ago to be at the sort of peak moment or pivotal moment about those protests in Iran. Since then, it would appear that the Iranian leadership has, with some brutality, reasserted control in that respect. This message on Truth Social from the president, focusing, as you say, more on Iran's nuclear program, but not a lot of specificity, honestly, as to exactly what he wants or precisely how he intends to get it.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to ask you about next. President Trump says he wants the Iranians to come to the table to talk about the nuclear program. You know, I thought President Trump completely and without question destroyed this program in those military strikes last year. What could be a framework for a new deal that would obviously have to be infinitely better than the one negotiated by President Obama during his term, which Trump has spent more than a decade criticizing?
It's, again, something where the president seems to be just asserting an American desire to push Iran further than it has ever gone before. There has been some reporting in the international media, for example, that Trump doesn't want Iran to have any long-range missile capabilities at all, nuclear or otherwise. The difficulty here, I think, from an international diplomacy standpoint is it seems almost inconceivable that Iran would agree to that kind of a deal. So therefore, are you setting the stage for an actual military confrontation? If you are, of course, America's military strength is much greater than Iran's, but you do run other risks as well in terms of destabilizing the region and all of that.
Yeah, speaking of, Saudi Arabia and UAE say they will not allow American forces to use their airspace or bases to attack Iran. What does that say about the concern among regional U.S. allies over potential military action in Iran?
I think it says a couple of things. One is, I think it speaks to a reluctance to be publicly identified with an unpredictable threat from the President of the United States. This, in fact, gets back to your earlier point about protests, Drew. It is certainly clearly true that there were very strong protests against the current Iranian leadership. But if the United States comes in on behalf of those protesters, do you end up actually delegitimizing the protests, making them seen as a patsy of the United States? Do you create a sort of nationalistic rallying around the existing leadership in Iran? So these dynamics play into the broader regional pattern, even as we have to say, Middle Eastern politics is always a bit of a hall of mirrors. It's possible that some of the nations you mentioned could have a different private position to the one they're expressing publicly.
Yeah, and I wonder if those U.S. allies who are enemies of Iran would like to see Iran weakened and potentially dealing with instability at home, but a full collapse of the regime also presents some uncertainty that could be dangerous for those countries.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is an age-old issue, not just in the Middle East, but in all sorts of places around the world. If there is a regime that we can say is morally or ethically or politically bad in some sense, but it preserves a degree of stability, what's then the right course forward? I mean, just to take one example, Muammar Gaddafi in Libya was a fairly appalling character, but then he was removed and, of course, killed in the end, and it's caused enormous bloodshed and destabilization in that country. So these are the kind of complicated issues and parts of the equation that have to be weighed up against one another.
Yeah, destabilization in Libya and also a refugee situation that affects other countries in the area. How vulnerable do you think the Iranian regime is at the present moment. It seemed, as you said, to be wobbling in the face of those massive protests, but after that violent government crackdown, appears to have regained some of its grip on the country.
Yeah, I think it has, by all accounts, regained some of its grip on the country. Now, obviously, we're still getting a somewhat partial picture. There was a near total internet blackout in Iran, which made even getting knowledge of what was going on very difficult. But from everything that we're hearing, it seems that the moment of greatest danger to the Iranian leadership has passed. That is not to minimize the fact that there is real public opposition, public dissatisfaction in Iran, both about the general theocratic, ultra conservative nature of the leadership, but also, of course, about the economic problems that absolutely beset the Islamic Republic.
All right, we'll leave it at that and continue to follow the story. Niall Stanage, White House columnist here at The Hill. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Drew.